Welcome back, family heads, to another edition of Family Vacation. I'm your host, AJ Tsunari, and last week we had a good time goofing on one of the most polarizing releases of 2023, Avenged Sevenfold's Life is But a Dream. Now that July is over and we're getting closer to Season 2, I thought we'd shake things up a little bit by taking a trip down memory lane. For now, the mini-reviews are on hiatus, at least for me, and instead, I'm going to do a little retrospective of every album we reviewed for Season 1. We've got 42 albums to cover, so for the next couple weeks, I'm going to go through each one, giving my updated opinions and discussing the albums in context of the episodes we reviewed them on. This will also serve as my own personal ranking of each of these albums, and this week we'll be going through numbers 42 through 31. I think this will be a fun little project leading up to the release of Season 2, just a fun way to reflect on the past season, as well as discuss these albums in depth one last time. But before we dive into my least favorite album of Season 1, we're going to take a little ad break, so be right back.
Hey Matt, you know what I love?
Steely Dan?
Well, yes, but I also love how easy it is for two goobers like us to make a podcast.
I mean, with Spotify for Podcasters, it's no wonder. Spotify for Podcasters is a one-stop shop that's got everything you need to create the perfect podcast.
That's right. Using Spotify for Podcasters, you can directly record and edit your podcast wherever you are, using their intuitive and easy-to-use website.
And once you're done editing, Spotify for Podcasters takes care of the hard part and distributes your podcast directly to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are available.
And now you can even make video podcasts available on Spotify, which gives you even more freedom to make the podcast you want, while also giving your lovely listeners a chance to see your face.
Speaking of listeners, Spotify for Podcasters also encourages fan engagement by letting you get feedback directly from your listeners with Q&As and polls made by you.
You can even make money with your podcast through ads, podcast subscriptions, and donations directly from your audience.
Spotify for Podcasters offers all of this, and it's completely free to use with no catch whatsoever.
Guys, Spotify for Podcasters made recording and distributing the family album so easy. Being able to schedule our episodes ahead of time and letting them take care of distribution took so much weight off our shoulders.
For anyone that's ever even thought about starting a podcast, we highly recommend giving Spotify for Podcasters a try.
You can download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Once again, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters.
And we're back. Without further ado, let's kick this thing off with my least favorite album that we reviewed on Season 1. Starting off, coming in at number 42, we've got Crybaby by Melanie Martinez. Yeah, you guys probably saw this one coming. I've been taking jabs at this album, as well as Miss Martinez, ever since that episode came out. Just want to say, no disrespect at all towards Elizabeth, the guest who brought Crybaby on for her episode. I'm glad that she enjoys this project, and I'm glad that we discussed it because that's one of my favorite episodes that we've done so far. But my opinion on this album has soured big time. Part of that has to do with learning more about Martinez as a person, as well as the allegations against her. But the more that I sat on this album, the more I realized that Crybaby is really at odds with itself. The childlike lens Martinez uses to talk about serious issues oftentimes takes away from the message and can feel insensitive due to questionable lyrics and odd metaphors. For example, Mrs. Potato Head discusses the idea of women's body issues and the use of plastic surgery by comparing that to switching out the parts of a Mrs. Potato Head toy. It's very on the nose and hard to take seriously, as Martinez portrays Mrs. Potato Head as this figure of guidance. But that's nothing compared to Tag You're It. I understand that Martinez had good intentions with this song, but when you compare sexual assault to being kidnapped by the big bad wolf and using tag as a metaphor, it just doesn't feel tactful. Especially during the bridge where she plays Eeny Meeny Miny Mo, that just doesn't sit right with me. The production of this album also leaves a lot to be desired, with extremely obnoxious sound effects and strange creative decisions that clash tonally with the serious topics each song discusses. There's the bubble bath bass drop on Soap, the pouring liquid on Sippy Cup, and of course the dreaded baby talk on Alphabet Boy, which I still find baffling to this day. When I first listened to Crybaby, it made me feel like I got put on a list just for listening to it, so my rating can only go so high. Originally, I gave this project a 5 out of 10 and said it was bordering C and D tier, but now that I've had more time to reflect on this project, I realized that rating was way too generous. Going forth for my new ratings, I'm just going to give them letter grades to keep things simple, since having both numbers and letters seems a bit arbitrary now. With that being said, my new rating for Crybaby is a D-. Personally, this album could be F tier, but the only thing saving it from that fate is the fact that Crybaby is a competently produced album. Also, tracks like Dollhouse, Pity Party, and the title track are solid, inoffensive songs that really don't detract from the listening experience. Training Wheels would have also been included in that group, but some of the lyrics on that song are sus as fuck. But there we have my least favorite album we've covered on the podcast so far. Let's move on to second to last. Number 41, we've got Panic at the Disco's Death of a Bachelor. Oh dear, Brendan Urie. We all realize now that this man had way too much power, but we were so naive back in 2016. Panic's first outing as a Brendan Urie solo act shows how scattered an ego left unchecked can be without the input of the other band members. From the moment this album starts, it plays all of its cards immediately by including every unfortunate element that makes this album a chore to sit through. Brendan yelling and exclusively using his high register? Check. Extremely in-your-face, whiplash-inducing instrumentals? Check. An annoying hook that doesn't fit the rest of the song tonally? Fucking bingo, we got 'em all! Death of a Bachelor suffers from too many conflicting ideas being mashed together in an attempt to appease the desires of a rampant theater kid. And much like Life is But a Dream, most of these ideas do not work. The use of the Rock Lobster riff on Don't Threaten Me with a Good Time is extremely tacky and adds nothing to the song besides it being recognizable. The pitched-down dubstep vocals on Emperor's New Clothes, as well as the strangely frequent dubstep influences all over this album, sound very dated and are just there as attention grabbers. And Urie's squealing vocals on the chorus of Golden Days is one of the countless examples of Urie needlessly abusing his high range. Death of a Bachelor is mostly style over substance, which makes sense as Urie was literally trying every idea he could think of to harken back to the days of when he first discovered music. But Urie did not have the versatility to pull off this approach, leading to an obnoxious 36-minute experiment of throwing shit at the wall and none of it sticking. However, I can admit there are some solid tracks on this album. The title track, An Impossible Year, see Urie pulling off Sinatra surprisingly decently, and LA Devotee is Urie's very pleasant take on a Taylor Swift song. But even these bright spots can't save the obnoxious ego stroke that is Death of a Bachelor. My old rating for this album was a 3.7 out of 10 and a D tier, and the new one is about the same, a not-so-solid D-. Moving on to number 40, we have Bastille's Gimme the Future. I guess we have a running theme of things I don't like, tonal inconsistency, which is strange because Ween is one of my favorite bands of all time, and they've literally played every genre. But I can assure you, Bastille is no Ween, especially on their 2022 Society Core album that can never decide what exactly it wants to say. A concept album in theory, Gimme the Future describes a dystopian society where civilization is completely reliant and obsessed with technology. But it also says that maybe technology is not such a bad thing and that escapism is good sometimes. Which I guess, yeah, escapism is good once in a while, but like, can you pick a lane, Bastille? You can't really have it both ways when some songs are saying technology bad and others are saying actually it can be good though. And then you have tracks like Thelma and Louise and Club 57 that are like, why am I on this album? As if the themes weren't muddied enough, the way that they're conveyed is absolutely horrendous. Gimme the Future has some of the wackest lyrics I've ever heard, sung by a vocalist that I just do not see the appeal of. I mentioned it on the Bastille episode, but no one needs to hear Dan Smith singing about virtual porn, especially when he raps about it with a basic triplet flow, sounding like he's about to launch the fattest snot rocket into the microphone. Also, I'm still not over that Blade Runner line, like, come on guys, you can do better than that. Moving on to the music, I already forgot what I was going to say, it's that forgettable. With the exception of the consistently solid bass lines, nothing about the musicality on this album is particularly noteworthy. I guess besides the fact that it's just a smidge too low in the mix and lacks a lot of weight on heavy-hitting moments. I'll say sonically the album is pretty consistent with the theme, often using synthwave motifs and things like harmonizers and text-to-speech to capture the futuristic aesthetic that the album is trying to push. Though a lot of the time it comes across more as a gimmick, and the harmonizer gets old incredibly quickly. Not even Smith's beloved technology can improve the quality of his vocals. Gimme the Future is an album that wants to say something, but doesn't really know how. Coupled with the embarrassing songwriting and lackluster instrumentals, you get a boring, confused lecture that feels way longer than it is. Which is saying something because this album is just over 30 minutes long. My original rating of this project was a 3.3 out of 10 and a D tier, and my rating has not changed. Gimme the Future gets a D. Number 39, we have Recess by Skrillex. Oh, Recess, perhaps I treated you too harshly. I originally tore this album to shreds on first listen, which I kind of regret. I basically attacked an album for being a part of a genre that I don't particularly enjoy or understand, so for that, I apologize, Mr. Skrill. Now, does that mean that I've come around and I'm now certified Skrill-pilled? Absolutely not. This album still has major flaws. Starting off with the obvious, this album aged like milk. Skrillex's production style is incredibly aggressive and of its time, which makes it hard to listen to outside the context of 2014. Utilizing stock sound effects, voiceovers, and a whole lot of premature fucks, you can tell exactly who this album was made for and when. The music itself I don't really find enjoyable, but I'm not the most reliable source, since dubstep and EDM are genres that I'm not particularly fond of. However, the drops on most of these songs do more harm than good in my opinion. I often find myself engaged with the songs it starts, but the drop takes such a drastic left turn or just does way too much that it squanders any potential that the song originally had. Ease My Mind being the prime example, as the song is very good until the drop happens. There are also songs that are just dead on arrival in concept and execution. Doompy Poomp is a shitpost that sounds like a scuffed version of Pirate Jet by Gorillaz. Fuck That is built around the sample of someone saying the titular fuck that, sounding like a recording your high school friends made after just installing GarageBand. And Dirty Vibe is just terribly obnoxious all around. This album does have one saving grace, that being Coast is Clear featuring Chance the Rapper. A very solid hip-hop song with EDM influence that gives the listener a chance to breathe. Skrillex takes his foot off the gas on this one and lets the feature do his thing, without being buried by the production or gimmicks. It may be the most traditional song on the album, but it's the one that aged the best. Recess serves as a time capsule for a musical movement that burned out in popularity fairly quickly, but remains popular and beloved by people in the scene. I am not one of those people, but I'm happy that you guys have this one. My original rating of Recess by Skrillex was a 3 out of 10 and a D tier, and you'll be happy to hear that I'm feeling generous. My new rating puts Recess at a D+. What a character arc. Number 38, we have Kamikaze by Eminem. Ah yes, the infamous Revival Response album. And just like the title suggests, it's the album where Nem killed his career. Get it? Just kidding, Eminem's doing just fine right now. But not so much back in 2018 after all the backlash he got for one of the worst rap albums ever made. While Kamikaze is an improvement over its predecessor, Eminem refuses to let you forget about it, and blatantly tells you you're wrong if you thought it was bad. It's hard to look at this album without the context of Revival, as that's one of the core themes that comes up throughout, with the others being how Eminem still got it and that new rap sucks. Kamikaze is a bitter project that sees Eminem going after everybody as he usually does, but in a way that comes off as defensive and childish, which makes the overall listening experience hard to sit through. Tracks like The Ringer, Greatest, the title track, Fall, and even the Paul skits all just go over the same themes of how Eminem is still the best and how we're all wrong, but deliver with a flow that, while better than Revival, is still nothing compared to what he was doing back in the 2000s. It's a very contradictory album that really doubles down instead of moving past mistakes. Speaking of mistakes, there are way too many on this album to count, starting with the beats. The beats are consistently lame throughout, taking on a more modern trap style, rather than the stripped-back traditional hip-hop that made MMLP so good. The dad jokes are also ever present and have not improved since 2017, which is to be expected. However, there's a little twist on them this time around, with Eminem petulantly asking the audience if they understood the wordplay by saying, "Get it?" after almost every one. Of course, there's also the infamous Tyler the Creator line that was a step way too far. Eminem has since apologized, but no amount of album backlash warrants that kind of speech. In terms of highlights, Good Guy is probably the best track on the album, with an instrumental that's genuinely great and a feature by Jesse Reyes that truly makes the song what it is. And best of all, none of the core themes of Kamikaze are explored. Other highlights include Joyner Lucas's feature on Lucky You, freshening up a track that's bogged down by Eminem's lethargic flow and impression of mumble rap. The sentiment of Stepping Stone is nice, with Eminem reflecting on the fallout he had with D12. However, his auto-tune performance on the chorus of this track keeps it from being considered great. And the title track is an interesting experiment as it utilizes FAC, often considered Eminem's worst song, as a comparison to the reception Revival got. But then it mostly follows the core themes of Kamikaze and has Eminem getting defensive and stroking his ego, so points for trying, I guess. Kamikaze is an interesting, if tiresome, album that really lets you see the psyche of a man that just won't back down. And there are moments where this is very entertaining, but a majority of this album comes across as a child throwing a 45-minute temper tantrum. My original ranking of Kamikaze was a 4.9 out of 10 and a high D, and my new opinion remains the same. Let's call that a D+. I'm going to be ranking numbers 37 and 36 at the same time because they're essentially the same album. For these two spots, we've got the Pentatonics combo of PTX Volumes 1 and 3. Oh, who could forget the infamous Pentatonics episode? God, I wish I could. Lucky for me, I basically forgot both of these albums, so I'll take that as a win. While no one can deny how incredibly talented the members of Pentatonics are. You know, let me just say that again in case people didn't hear me.
While no one can deny how incredibly talented the members of Pentatonics are.
An issue on both albums is that the group never really knows when to back off. Each track is just really busy with mouth sounds and theater kid energy that makes listening to both albums very monotonous and repetitive. To me, the group is good in small doses, as there you can appreciate the incredible control displayed by each of their voices, and how well each of their divided parts complement each other when performed together. But after like 3 songs, you just hit a wall and are like, okay, I get it. What if Can't Hold Us by Macklemore had more halftime? I stated this on the podcast, but my god, does this group love their halftime. In terms of their cover songs, they range from actually very good and interesting, like Royals and Papa Tie, to uninspired and obnoxious, like We Are Young and Problem. They're interesting takes on these popular songs, but they're no replacement, and there's really no reason to listen to these versions over the originals. They're mostly just quirky experiments. Their original songs don't fare much better, as the impulsive production decisions of the covers are now combined with weak songwriting, feeling like filler on an album just filled with covers. I get their shtick as covers, but if there's not going to be as much effort in the originals, then why do them in the first place? I've been over both of these albums ever since that episode came out, so I don't really have much to say, and they're pretty interchangeable in my ranking. I'd say Volume 3 is objectively better, as it's an improvement in terms of quality and production decisions, but Volume 1 is significantly shorter, so dealer's choice, I guess. My original ranking for PTX Volume 1 was a 6.5 out of 10 and C tier, and for Volume 3 a 7 out of 10 and C tier. Now both of them get a C-. At number 35, we've got Badlands by Halsey, an album that is completely bogged down by one fatal flaw, the production. Jesus Christ, the lack of diversity of sound on this album makes it such a slog to listen to. Which is a shame because Halsey's voice is genuinely great. It really would be nice if she had more interesting instrumentals to accompany her. But instead, we get songs that have the exact same song structure and tempo for almost its entire runtime. The lack of variety makes each song sound identical, if not for a few different production decisions or creative editing that's spread throughout. Now, the brooding minimal instrumentals do fit the concept of Badlands, as it's this dystopian society that represents Halsey's state of mind, so the heavy monotony does convey a dark feeling that's representative of the struggles that Halsey was going through at the time. However, as someone whose main focus when listening to music is the instrumentals, I need some diversity or I'm just gonna zone out. Halsey's a great vocalist, but she alone can't command my attention for almost an hour. Well, maybe she can, with some lyrics that are extremely representative of the time they were written, as well as the demographic they were written for. There's really no way for me to appreciate these lyrics as I didn't grow up with Tumblr and was never involved with the culture, but on an objective level, some of the stuff is a little cringe. The spoken word section of Colors just screams Tumblr core and comes across kind of pretentious in a song that's supposed to be about seeing someone drastically change due to drug abuse. But Badlands does have some positives that alleviate my problems with the album. When Halsey leaves her comfort zone, the results are often great. Album highlight Roman Holiday completely goes against the themes of Badlands, delivering an upbeat, 80s-inspired runaway track with a killer synth solo to boot. New Americana takes on a triumphant marching feel, and acts as an anthem the new generation can legitimately get behind, even if the lyrics are very corny. And while I'm not huge on the track Gasoline as a whole, the use of a shamisen is a completely unexpected choice, but one that works beautifully for the tone the song is going for. So Halsey can create a project that's engaging both lyrically and musically, but on this album, she just didn't go for it. And I mean, fair enough, this was her first attempt, and from what I've heard of her later work, she really does improve in this aspect. Badlands' fatal flaw is that it's really boring, and ultimately suffers from extremely repetitive song structures and instrumentals that make you feel like a prisoner. But there are some decent highlights that save it from being completely irredeemable. My old score for Badlands by Halsey was a 6 out of 10 and C tier, and I wholeheartedly agree. A middle-of-the-road C for a middle-of-the-road album. On to number 34, we've got Some Nights. Oh boy, a family album classic. So Some Nights is fucking weird. I don't really know how to describe this album. Its existence is just kind of confusing. Nate Ruess and the boys try a lot of different avenues, and while there are spectacular failures, there are also rousing successes. Unlike Death of a Bachelor, Some Nights feels as though each song idea was made with a specific end goal in mind, rather than just something quirky or gimmicky Brendan Urie wanted to try out. When the group leans into the traditional pop sound, the results are usually solid, with Carry On being a genuinely inspiring march that tells you to keep on trucking. And while I'm still of the opinion We Are Young doesn't hit as hard as it did when it first came out, it's still an iconic anthem celebrating the freedom of youth. Though the line about the scar is still kind of fucked up, Nate. So as proven, Fun can do pop pretty well, and it turns out that they can mix this style with different genres very effectively. For example, All Alone is easily the most underrated track on this album, as it beautifully blends elements of pop and ska in a way that's incredibly catchy, with those almost 8-bit synths and commanding horn sections during the choruses. However, Some Nights does have some common flaws shared by other albums this low on my ranking. Much like Pentatonix and Skrillex, this album suffers from weird production choices that just tank some songs with great potential. The weird 808 break and auto-tune squeals during the title track just do not fit, and ruin what would be another great single. That and the lyrics about Nate's nephew, which is just strange on a different level. It gets better, blends elements of pop punk and breakcore to disastrous results, and the overuse of autotune and Nate Ruess showing off his vocal range completely derails what would be an amazing closer in Stars. I guess while we're on the topic, Some Nights also shares a flaw with Death of a Bachelor, as its frontman suffers from an inflated ego as well. Nate Ruess is very obnoxious on this album, constantly trying to show off his vocal range by really emphasizing and stretching out notes, as well as just making weird noises. There are moments on this album where you can tell that Ruess just loves the sound of his own voice. Some obvious examples being the Never Gonna Stop Us Now outro on Carry On, and the previously mentioned autotune squeals that appear all over this album. All in all, Some Nights is a strange project that does have some really good ideas, but suffers from similar issues of strange and abrasive production decisions. My old rating for Some Nights by Fun was a 6.5 out of 10 and a C tier, and nothing has changed with that. C for Some Nights, Come Nights if you will. On to number 33, we've got Coldplay's X and Y. So this album is a bit of a reverse Halsey situation for me. I really enjoy the music, but I cannot stand the vocals. Chris Martin is a vocalist that I just can't get behind. I don't know if it's because of his silly British inflections, or the fact that his presence is as commanding as the Wojak standing in a corner at a party saying they don't even know I'm Chris Martin from Coldplay. But either way, I don't like him. Tracks often feel limp due to Chris's lackadaisical delivery and lyrics that are just pretty generic. With of course the exception being Fix You, which I've described my issues with on the X and Y episode. I respect what the song's about and the sentiment Chris had when writing it, but outside of that context, it comes across as very condescending to me. This album is also so bloated, oh my god. Songs go on forever when they really don't have to. Most tracks just meander on the same instrumentals without ever really developing, leading to songs becoming stale very quickly. But while this is the case, the musicality is very impressive, and most of the hooks are solid, until they wear out their welcome. Specific shoutouts go to Will Champion's drumming and Johnny Buckland's guitar work, both of which are consistently great and keep things somewhat diverse. I don't really have too much to say about X and Y. Musically, it's more interesting than Badlands, and more consistent in song quality than Some Nights, which is why it ranks higher than both. But besides a couple highlights like the speed of sound and the title track, this album is just really bloated and really boring. My original rating for X and Y by Coldplay was a 6.4 out of 10 and a C tier, and my rating remains the same yet again. C for Coldplay. Let's go, almost there. At number 32, we got What a Drag by Beach Weather. And I probably have less to say about this album than X and Y. What a Drag is the epitome of fine. As the debut EP of Beach Weather, it serves its purpose by delivering some fun, if a bit basic summertime indie rock, while also leaving room for improvement in the songwriting and production departments. It's solid for what it is and doesn't overstay its welcome, as it's one of the shortest projects we've ever reviewed on the show. My original ranking for What a Drag by Beach Weather was a 6.6 out of 10 and a C tier, and wouldn't you guess, my current rating remains the same, staying at a C. And at last, we reached the final album for this week. Number 31, we got Turtleneck and Chain by The Lonely Island. So this album is pretty fun, but does suffer from a runtime that's a bit too long and half-baked concepts that result in tracks falling flat. Most tracks take the core bit to the ultimate extreme, leading to them becoming predictable and stale by the time they're over. Mama is a funny idea that sees the group singing high praises about their mother, only to berate and yell at her when she keeps interrupting them while they're recording. But the longer it goes on, the less funny it gets. Trouble on Dookie Island has a really great instrumental and sample, but is bogged down by relying on gross out and repetition of the word dookie to deliver the laughs. And while I love the constant mention of light beer on the title track, the rest of it is very underwhelming with a pretty wasted feature from Snoop Dogg. Also, the skits on this album are completely unnecessary and would change literally nothing if they weren't included. Falcor vs. Atreyu is also just really weird. But this album isn't remembered for these lackluster tracks or pointless skits. Turtleneck and Chain is remembered for those classic viral music videos that got kids like me turnt in middle school. Jack Sparrow, Mother Lover, I Just Had Sex, Threw It on the Ground. While not as funny as when I was 12, they still hold up musically and conceptually, which I'm very glad is the case. This album even has sleeper hits like Rocky, which has this awesome funk-influenced classic hip-hop beat that goes on rightfully hard, and the concept about Andy Samberg getting his ass kicked by Rocky is a nice touch. Overall, Turtleneck and Chain is an amusing album that suffers from not knowing when to move on, but when it works very well. My old rating for Turtleneck and Chain by The Lonely Island was a 6 out of 10 and a C tier, and I stand by that. C for Turtleneck and Chain. And we are done with the first part of this ranking retrospective of Season 1. What did you guys think? I thought it was a nice way to diversify the content as well as reflect on the journey of the family album so far. How would you guys rank these albums? Leave your ranking in the comments or question of the week on Spotify. Next time we'll be taking a look at albums 30 through 21, and I'll probably be a lot more generous than this episode. That'll do it for this week. As always, I'm your host, AJ Tenari. Thank you for listening and your constant support, and we'll see you next week.